Hello, my name is Emily Gould, and I chose to do my final project on Huntington's disease. Today I'm going to share with you a brief history about the disease, describe the disorder including its phenotype and genotype, discuss the type of mutation that occurs, as well as who it affects, and whether there are any current treatments for Huntington's. And lastly, I'm going to share a real-life testimonial. Huntington's disorder is characterized as a progressive brain disorder that causes uncontrolled movements, emotional problems, and loss of thinking ability. Huntington's disorder affects the entire brain, but certain areas are more vulnerable than others. Here in this picture above, we can see that the basal ganglia is highlighted in blue. In this area, we have a group of nerve cell clusters called the nuclei that play a key role in one's movement and behavior control. These are the parts of the brain that are most prominently affected in the early stages of Huntington's disorder. I also wanted to share a brief history and background about Huntington's disorder. Huntington's disorder was first recognized as an inherited disorder in 1872 when a 22-year-old doctor, George Huntington, wrote a paper called On Chorea. Chorea is associated as an abnormal involuntary muscle disorder. Now, after this paper was published, the disorder became known as Huntington's chorea. As you can see on the right, there's a picture of George Huntington. Today, the term Huntington's disease is more commonly used than Huntington's chorea. Throughout this time period in the 18th and 19th centuries, chronic adult hereditary chorea was poorly understood because people who had the gene died before symptoms could develop. Now that we live longer and science has developed, the HD gene has more time to express itself. Although it wasn't until 1993 that the discovery of the gene that caused HD was discovered. There are several recognizable signs and symptoms of Huntington's disorder. In broader terms, these include chorea, which is, as I mentioned, means abnormal involuntary muscle movements, and dystonia, which includes involuntary muscle contractions that result in slow, repetitive movements, cramps, or abnormal posture. Other symptoms also include incoordination, cognitive decline, and behavioral difficulties. These symptoms generally appear in someone ages 30 to 50 and usually worsen over a 10 to 25 year period. Again, we see that the basal ganglia part of the brain is affected, which is evidenced in this picture below. On this slide, I included a more depth explanation of how this disease impacts the body. Huntington's disease symptoms can be split up into three categories: movement, thinking or cognitive, and psychiatric disorders. Some general movement disorders include involuntary jerking, which is more commonly known as chorea, muscle problems, slower abnormal eye movements, impaired gait, posture, and balance, or difficulty with physical production of speech or swallowing. Some general cognitive disorders include difficulty organizing, prioritizing, or focusing, lack of flexibility, tendency to get stuck on a thought, behavior, action, lack of impulse control, and more. Lastly, some general psychiatric disorders include feelings of irritability, sadness or apathy, social withdrawal, insomnia, fatigue and loss of energy, or frequent thoughts of death or dying. As you saw on the last slide, there are a range of symptoms that can occur with the onset of HD, and that's why it's important to understand what type of disorder it is and how it is inherited. Huntington's disorder is an inherited genetic disorder that occurs from a defect in a single gene. Its mode of inheritance is through an autosomal dominant pattern. This means that one copy of the altered gene in each cell is sufficient enough to cause the disorder. On the right side, I've included a diagram of how an autosomal dominant disease affects one offspring. Here you can see that there is an affected father and an unaffected mother. Now with their 4 offspring, you can see that the affected father passes off 2 copies of the mutated gene, and because of its autosomal dominant pattern. Both children are affected who have the affected or mutated gene. To further explain the mode of inheritance of Huntington's disease, I included this Punnett square. Here we can see that a person who carries a single copy of the defective gene, uppercase H, lowercase h, has a child with a person who carries the normal genotype, lowercase h. There is a 50% chance that the child will inherit the defective gene and therefore have Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease occurs when extra bases in the gene add amino acids to the protein products, which impairs certain transcription factors in proteasomes. The diagram to the right shows a healthy protein with 10 to 26 repeats of the base pair CAG. This gene is on the upper half of the diagram. However, an unhealthy protein is also shown that includes several more repeats, which is characterized as Huntington's disease. This is the bottom half of the diagram. I will explain this in greater depth shortly. The diagram shown here is a great representation of the Huntington gene and how it is affected. The Huntington gene is also known as HTT or HD and is located on chromosome 4. Mutations in this gene are what cause Huntington's disease. The HTT gene provides instructions for making a protein called Huntington. However, the function of this protein is currently unknown, but it appears to play an important role in nerve cells in the brain. The HTT mutation that causes Huntington's disease involves a DNA segment known as CAG, which is a trinucleotide repeat. This is made up of a series of the DNA building blocks cytosine, adenine, and guanine. This appears to repeat multiple times in a row. Normally, the CAG segment is repeated 10 to 35 times, as shown in the picture previously. However, in people with Huntington's disease, the CAG segment is repeated 36 to even 120 times more. People with 36 to 39 CAG repeats may or may not develop the signs and symptoms of Huntington's disease. However, people with 40 or more repeats almost always develop this disorder. Here, I just wanted to reemphasize the fact that Huntington's disorder is a triple repeat mutation or a trinucleotide repeat disorder, which results in the expansion of the CAG base. Once again, a normal CAG segment is repeated 10 to 35 times within a gene. However, Huntington's disease is characterized by a segment which is repeated 36 plus times. Also, it's important to know that as the altered HTT or Huntington gene is passed from one generation to the next, the size of the CAG base often repeats and increases in size. As I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, Huntington's disease usually occurs in people ages 30 to 50 and does not discriminate based on gender or geographic location. This map on the left is a very general observation of the prevalence of the disease across the world. Huntington's is currently found in many different countries and within many different ethnic groups around the world. The highest frequencies shown on this map are found in Europe and in countries of the European region, whether that be the United States or Australia. The lowest documented to this date frequencies of HD are found in Africa, China, Japan, and Finland. As I said, this is a very general overview of the United States and Huntington's disease, the prevalence of. With all of this being said, unfortunately today there is still no cure for Huntington's disease. As a society, we have not yet developed a treatment that can reverse its progression and is currently incurable. It is important to understand, though, that while people are born with the mutated gene for HD because it is inherited, in most cases they will not develop the symptoms until later in life. Therefore, someone can be without symptoms or pre-symptomatic for a number of years. In the past, there has been no way to test for the abnormal gene, but now today, there are blood tests that can determine whether or not an individual carries the gene for HD. Some symptoms of HD can be managed, however, with medications and therapies. For example, tetrabenazine is a drug approved by the FDA, which can help treat chorea associated with HD. Furthermore, speech therapy and physical or occupational therapy may also help to relieve some of the symptoms associated with the disorder. Lastly, I wanted to end and summarize the overall significance of Huntington's disorder. Today, there are approximately 30,000 symptomatic Americans and more than 200,000 at risk of inheriting Huntington's disease. Clearly, it's very prevalent. While we still fight to find a cure, there are people out there living with the disease who have been brave enough to share their stories. The I Am the Difference campaign was started by the Huntington Study Group, who conducts clinical research seeking treatments that make a difference for Huntington disease. The Huntington Study Group wants to help us as a society learn more about their research studies and provide us with information on research that people may wish to participate in. I wanted to end and share one short story of a boy living with Huntington's disorder. His name is Corey Sargent, and he wrote a poem to emphasize how he is the difference and was brave enough to share his story. It reads, I came into this world a loving boy, ran and laughed and played with all my toys. I was a normal kid until one day when my body and mind wouldn't let me play. As the days went by, things got harder to do, just to eat, think, and turn my head to look at you. The one thing I want but cannot say, I love you each and every day. As the clock on the wall runs the time away, I hear your voice fighting every day. Find a cure for which my family has endured, that one day we will find a cure. This moving poem is extremely symbolic of how living with Huntington's disorder affects one's everyday life and ultimately summarizes my presentation extremely well. So with that, I want to say thank you for listening, and please visit the Huntington Study Group website to learn more about individuals affected with Huntington's disorder and to listen and to hear their stories.